My granddaughter wouldn't let go of my hand at the Easter dinner table. She's 7 years old, and she's always been a hugger, always bouncing around, always the loudest laugh in any room. But that Sunday, at my daughter's house in Barrie, she just sat beside me with both her small hands wrapped around my one, squeezing like she was afraid of something. She wouldn't touch her food. She kept glancing toward the hallway. I'm a retired firefighter, 31 years with the city of Sudbury before my knees gave out and my wife finally convinced me to hang it up. I've seen things that don't leave you. I know what fear looks like on a person's face. I've seen it on grown men. Seeing it on my granddaughter at an Easter dinner table, surrounded by family and ham and deviled eggs, made my stomach drop. "Papa," she whispered, leaning close, "can I sit in your car?" My daughter looked up from across the table. "Hazel, stop being silly. Eat your dinner." Hazel's father, my son-in-law, didn't look up at all. He was scrolling through his phone, one arm slung over the back of his chair like he owned every room he'd ever been in. Which, in that house, I suppose he did. His name was Derek, and I'd never trusted him the way you're supposed to trust the man your daughter chooses. I told myself that was just fathers and sons-in-law. I told myself I was being unreasonable. I smiled at Hazel and kept her hand in mine. After dinner, when the adults moved to the living room and my daughter started clearing plates, I found Hazel sitting on the back porch steps by herself, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the garage door at the end of the backyard. I sat down beside her. "You cold, sweetheart?" She shook her head. "You feel sick?" Another head shake. I waited. That's something you learn in 31 years on the job. Sometimes you just have to let the silence do the work. "Papa," she said finally. So quiet I almost missed it. "The garage makes me bad." I felt something move through my chest. "What do you mean makes you bad?" She picked at the rubber sole of her sneaker. "When Daddy takes me there, it makes me feel bad inside." My heart was hammering. I kept my voice level the way I'd kept it level at 100 terrible scenes. "What does Daddy do in the garage, Hazel?" She went very still. And then she said, "He said it's our special secret, and if I tell, you and Nana won't love me anymore." I pulled her close without saying a word. I held her against my side and stared at that garage door, and I felt something cold and clarifying settle over me. The kind of feeling I used to get pulling up to a scene before I knew what I was walking into. The kind that sharpens you. "Hazel," I said carefully, "Nana and I will always love you, no matter what. No secret could ever change that." She buried her face against my arm. "Promise?" "I promise you on everything I've got." My daughter appeared at the porch door. "Dad, you want coffee? Derek's got the fire going." I looked at her. My girl. 41 years old, still with her mother's eyes, completely unaware. "I'll be right in," I said. I didn't sleep that night. My wife, Sandra, listened to me in the dark of our bedroom in Sudbury, and I could feel the precise moment she understood what I was telling her, the way her breathing changed, the way she went completely still. "You're sure?" she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm not sure of anything, but I know that little girl is scared of that garage in a way that isn't normal." Sandra sat up and turned on her bedside lamp. She's a psychiatric nurse. Has been for 35 years. She looked at me the way she looks at things that need to be handled carefully and precisely. "You have to call the CAS," she said. "First thing tomorrow. Children's Aid Society." I already knew that. I'd been lying there running through every other option, every way this could be something else. Every explanation that didn't involve what I was terrified it involved. I came up empty every time. "Kathleen will hate me," I said. Sandra put her hand over mine. "Kathleen will eventually understand. Hazel doesn't get it later." I called Children's Aid at 8 o'clock the next morning. The woman I spoke to was professional and calm. She told me they would open an investigation. She told me they would be in touch. She told me I'd done the right thing calling. I hung up and felt like I'd swallowed a stone. My daughter called me at noon. "Dad, someone from CAS came to the door this morning. Derek is furious. What did you do?" I'd practiced this. Sandra had helped me practice this. "Kathleen, I need you to listen to me carefully. Hazel said something to me at dinner last night that I had a legal and moral obligation to report. That's all I can tell you right now, and I need you to trust me." There was a long silence. "Tell me what she said." "I can't, sweetheart. Not right now. Please just trust me." She hung up. She didn't call back for 3 days. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. Sandra kept working her shifts. I sat in our kitchen and stared at the backyard and thought about Derek, about the things I'd dismissed, how Hazel had started going quiet around the time she turned 5, how she started having accidents at night again after she'd been fully trained for 2 years, how my daughter had explained it away as stress, as the new school, as just being a sensitive kid, how Derek had put a new padlock on the garage last autumn and told Kathleen it was because tools kept going missing from the neighborhood. I thought about all of it, and I felt sick at myself for every moment I'd told myself I was imagining things. On the 3rd day, I drove to Barrie. I knew Derek's schedule. He commuted to Vaughan for work, leaving before 7, not back until after 6. Kathleen worked Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at a dental clinic in town. It was a Wednesday. I arrived at 9 a.m. and watched from the street until our car pulled out of the driveway and turned toward the highway. I sat there for another 10 minutes. Then I walked up to the house, let myself in through the side gate, and stood in the backyard facing the garage. The padlock was a good one. Solid brass, not the cheap hardware store kind. I'm not a man who breaks into places, but I'd spent 31 years forcing entry into buildings when children were inside. There was a secondary door on the side of the garage, older with a simple knob lock. I found a flathead screwdriver in Kathleen's gardening box near the fence. It took me less than 2 minutes. The air inside was cold and stale and wrong. There was something underneath it, something chemical that made me stop just inside the door. The garage looked ordinary at first. Derek's truck was in the driveway, so there was open space, a workbench along one wall, storage shelves, a chest freezer in the corner. And then I saw what was behind the shelving unit on the right side. It had been pushed a few inches away from the wall. Behind it was a door, not a closet. A door to a room that had no window. It wasn't locked. Inside there was a cot, a small wooden box with a combination lock on it, a ring mounted to the wall with a carabiner clipped to it, a digital camera on a folding table, a box of tissues, a child-sized step stool. I am not going to describe it further than that. Anyone reading this who has worked in child protection will understand what those items together mean. I understood it immediately and completely, and I had to lean against the doorframe because my legs stopped working properly. I took photographs on my phone, 17 photographs. I tried to be methodical. I tried to treat it like a scene. I tried the combination lock on the wooden box with 3 obvious combinations: Hazel's birthday, Derek and Kathleen's anniversary, Derek's birthday. The 3rd one opened it. Inside were 2 USB drives and a notebook with dates in Derek's handwriting, going back to March of the previous year. Hazel had turned 6 in April. I put the notebook and both drives in my jacket pocket. I relocked the box. I closed the door. I pushed the shelving unit back. I walked out of the garage and sat down on the ground in the backyard in the April mud, and I put my head in my hands. I heard the gate open. Kathleen was standing at the edge of the backyard, a paper bag of groceries in her arms, staring at me. "Dad." Her voice was strange. "What are you doing here?" I stood up slowly. I'm 63 years old, and my knees are shot, and it took me a moment to get upright. "I needed to see you." She looked at the garage door, then back at me. Something shifted in her face. "What were you doing in there?" "Kathleen." I crossed the yard and took the grocery bag from her, and I put my arm around her and I said, "I need you to come inside with me, and I need you to let me talk." She let me in. We sat at her kitchen table and I told her everything. Oliver's voice, no, Hazel's voice. What Hazel had said on the porch. What I'd reported. What I'd found. I kept my voice even. I kept my voice even. I kept my voice even at fires where people hadn't made it out. This was the hardest thing I'd ever had to keep my voice even for. Kathleen went white. Then she said, "You're lying." "I'm not." "You've never liked Derek. You're making this up." "Kathleen, I found a locked room in your garage." She looked at her hands. I watched her face cycle through denial, fury, something cracking open underneath. "I have photographs," I said, "and I have items from the garage that I'm taking to the police." "You broke into our—" "I broke into a room where someone was hurting my granddaughter." Silence. "Kathleen." I waited until she looked at me. "I know this feels like I'm destroying your life. I need you to understand that I am saving Hazel's." She put her face in her hands and started to cry. I drove directly to the Barrie Police Service detachment on Sperling Drive. I walked in and I told the officer at the desk that I had evidence of child sexual abuse. I had the words ready. I'd read about how these conversations went. I didn't let myself be unclear or soft about any of it. A detective named Forsyth came out within 10 minutes. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with a kind of face that had learned not to react to things. He took me to an interview room and I gave him the drives in the notebook and walked him through my photographs. He looked through the notebook first. Then he put on gloves and looked at the drives without opening them on his own laptop. He called someone, left the room, came back. "Mr. Alderton," he said, "I have to be honest with you. The way you obtain this material is going to create evidentiary issues." "I understand that," I said. "What I understand even more is that there's a locked room in that garage that hasn't been searched yet. And there's a little girl who told her grandfather she felt bad when her father took her there." He looked at me for a moment. "You're the grandfather." "I'm the grandfather." "She disclosed to you directly." "On Easter Sunday. That disclosure is documented in my report to Cass 3 days ago." He excused himself again. This time he was gone for 40 minutes. When he came back, he sat down across from me with a different expression. "We're applying for a warrant." Kathleen called me 7 times between 4 and 6 o'clock. I didn't answer. I knew she was warning Derek. I knew I couldn't stop her. I also knew that the warrant was moving faster than he could disappear, everything in that room. They arrested Derek at his office in Vaughan at 4:37 p.m. I only know that because Forsyth called me that evening to tell me. He also told me that Hazel had been collected from school by a child protection worker earlier that afternoon before the arrest, and that she was safe. She asked if her papa was coming. The worker told her she'd see me soon. The next weeks fractured my family in ways I'm still accounting for. Kathleen initially defended Derek. I believe she did it because the alternative, that she'd been living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, sending her daughter to school every morning, was too enormous to process all at once. She stopped answering my calls. Her brother, my son Arthur, who lives in Vancouver, called me and told me I'd gone too far, that I'd accused a man based on a child's imagination and broken into his property. Sandra handled Arthur. I won't say exactly what she said to him, but he didn't call back. My daughter came to me 6 weeks later. She showed up at our house in Sudbury on a Tuesday evening without calling ahead. She stood on the porch, and she looked 10 years older than she had at Easter. "Tell me what was on the drives," she said. "Kathleen, I need to hear it." I had been given a summary by the detective. I told her as much as I could bear to say. I kept it factual. I watched my daughter's face, and I thought about all the years I'd carried people out of burning buildings and how none of it had prepared me for this. She sat on our porch step for a long time. Then she said, "How long?" The notebook went back to when she was 5.5. She didn't make a sound. She just folded forward with her elbows on her knees and pressed her fists against her forehead. I sat beside her. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. She moved out of the Barrie house within a month, stayed temporarily with her friend outside Collingwood. Applied for legal separation. The house went on the market as part of the proceedings. She never went back to that garage. The forensic examination of the drives confirmed what the notebook suggested. The investigation expanded when it was discovered that Derek had been a member of an online network. I won't say more about that, and the charges multiplied. Sexual interference, sexual interference, sexual interference, sexual interference, distribution. Hazel was placed in my and Sandra's care on an interim basis while Kathleen stabilized and demonstrated that her home environment was safe. We drove to Barrie to pick her up on a Thursday afternoon in late May. She was standing in the doorway of a transition house with a social worker, holding a stuffed rabbit and wearing a backpack with her name written on it in black marker. She looked small. She looked like she'd been braced for something bad. When she saw my truck pull up, she ran. I got out before Sandra even had the passenger door open, and Hazel hit me at full speed, and I caught her and held her up, and she locked both arms around my neck. "You came," she said. "I told you I would always come," I said. She smelled like that children's soap that comes in a yellow bottle, and I held her there in the parking lot, and I was 63 years old, and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since my father died. Living with a 7-year-old who has been through trauma is nothing like you imagine. Sandra and I had raised Kathleen and Arthur. We knew children. We knew toddlers and homework and colds and nightmares. We did not know this. The nightmares were their own category, not the kind you comfort away in 5 minutes. The kind where she'd wake up in full terror, unable to locate herself, screaming for people who weren't there. Sandra knew what to do in those moments far better than I did. I'd stand in the doorway of the room we'd made up for her. Her old room from when Kathleen was small, repainted yellow, new bedding. And Sandra would be on the bed holding her, talking quietly, grounding her back into the present. I learned about trauma-informed parenting in my 60s. You learn what you need to learn when a child needs you to learn it. Hazel started seeing a therapist named Dr. Beaumont at the children's clinic in Sudbury twice a week. Dr. Beaumont was patient and precise and told us clearly what to expect, what not to expect, what would help, and what would not. We followed her guidance exactly. There were good weeks and hard weeks. Hazel started grade 2 at the school down the road from our house, made a friend named, well, I won't use her name, but a girl who liked the same kind of crafts, and for months they made elaborate paper animals together every Saturday morning at our kitchen table, watching Hazel sit in a patch of November sunlight and carefully fold a paper crane, concentrating, tongue between her teeth. Those moments mattered more than I can explain. She still didn't talk much about what had happened. Dr. Beaumont said that was appropriate. That the goal wasn't to excavate the past, but to build safety in the present. That the past would surface in its own time, on Hazel's terms. It surfaced in a drawing. About 8 months after she came to live with us, Hazel brought me a picture she'd made at school. 2 houses, side by side. One with dark windows, a black door, something jagged in the backyard that might have been a garage. One with yellow windows, a garden, 2 stick figures out front with a small one between them. This one is before, she told me, pointing to the dark house, and this one is now. She'd written our address at the bottom of the second house in careful, uneven letters. I have that drawing in a frame above my workbench. Derek Stroud took 14 months to reach. He had hired a lawyer and mounted a defense that his legal team clearly believed in more than the jury eventually did. They tried to argue the notebook was fabricated, that the drives had been planted, that a complex conspiracy involving me, Cass, and the Barrie Police Service had been constructed to destroy an innocent man. The forensic digital evidence was not something you explain away with a conspiracy theory. Kathleen testified. I don't know what it cost her. She's the bravest person I know, and I know a lot of people who have run into burning buildings. Hazel was not required to testify. Her disclosure to me, my Cass report, and the forensic evidence were sufficient. Dr. Beaumont submitted documentation about Hazel's symptoms and presentation. The child protection worker who collected Hazel from school testified about her demeanor and the words she'd said in the car on the way to the transition house. That testimony made 3 jurors cry. Derek was convicted on all counts. The judge, a woman who looked like she had heard everything and forgiven nothing, addressed him directly at sentencing. You occupied a position of absolute trust, she said. You were this child's father. You used that position systematically and deliberately over a period of years. The documentation you maintained indicates not pathological impulsivity, but calculated, sustained predation. This court has no interest in offering you a path back into a community that includes children. He received 22 years with no eligibility for parole for 16. I was sitting in that courtroom when they'd let him out. He didn't look at anyone. I thought about the Easter table, his arm over the back of his chair, the phone in his hand, the way he'd said Hazel's name, I thought, possessively, and I dismissed it as a father's pride. I didn't stay to watch him disappear through the door. I walked out into the hallway and sat on a bench, and Sandra sat beside me and put her hand on my knee, and we didn't say anything for a long time. Kathleen stood in the hall with her arms around herself, looking out the window. I went to her, and she let me hold her, and she cried in a way that had been building for over a year. I should have known, she said. You didn't know, I said. He made sure you didn't know. That's what predators do. She's my daughter. She's your daughter, and she's safe. And she knows you love her. You made sure she knows that. She did. Kathleen had been consistent and present throughout Hazel's time with us. Every weekend she could manage, she was at our house. She and Sandra had built a system, careful, supervised, slowly expanding, that let Hazel trust her mother again at her own pace. There were setbacks. There were days Hazel didn't want to see her. Kathleen showed up anyway and waited on the porch and let Hazel decide. That kind of love is its own form of courage. 16 months after the verdict, with Kathleen settled in a rental house in Collingwood and her own therapeutic support in place, Hazel moved back to live with her mother. We drove down on a Saturday to help set up her room. She'd picked out the paint color herself, a pale green called something botanical I can't remember. We put together a bookshelf from IKEA that took 4 times as long as it should have because none of us read instructions properly. Hazel supervised and corrected us in a loud, authoritative voice that sounded like the little girl I remembered from before all of this. At one point, she climbed onto my back while I was crouched over a bracket and said, "Papa, you're doing it wrong again." Sandra laughed from across the room. I said, "Maybe you should do it then, Miss Engineer." She thought about it seriously. "Okay," she said, and climbed down and took the screwdriver from my hand. I stayed with my wife, my daughter, and my granddaughter in that small house in Collingwood and watched Hazel eat almost an entire pizza by herself and tell us about her new school and the teacher who had a hamster named Kevin and the girl in her class who could do a backflip. And I thought about the Easter table, the way she'd held my hand, the garage door she wouldn't stop watching. I thought about how easy it would have been to take her inside when she asked to sit in the car, to tell myself she was just being difficult, to let my relief at a normal family dinner outweigh the cold feeling in my gut. Children don't tell directly. They test. They hint. They ask to sit in your car instead of at the table, and they hold your hand too tight and may say things like, "The garage makes me bad," and they watch your face to see if you can be trusted with the bigger thing underneath. If Hazel had held my hand and I had gently told her to eat her dinner, she might not have tried again for years. She might never have tried again. I know what those statistics look like. Sandra has worked with adults who are still carrying things they tried to show someone in 1987 and nobody stopped to look. I am not special. I am not a hero. I'm a retired firefighter with bad knees. And I had a granddaughter who trusted me enough to tell me something sideways on a porch in April. And I was paying attention. That's all it was. If you are reading this and something about a child in your life doesn't feel right, the way they go quiet, the way they flinch, the place they won't go back to, the person they don't want to be alone with, stop and look. Trust the cold feeling. Ask the quiet question. Let the silence do the work. You don't have to be certain. You just have to make the call. In Canada, if you suspect a child is being abused, you can call your provincial Child and Family Services line or the police directly. You don't need proof. You just need to say what you saw and what you heard. Professionals will take it from there. Hazel is 9 now. She still has hard days. She still sees Dr. Beaumont the only once a month. She plays ringgit, and she's obsessed with geology, and she has informed me that she intends to be a volcanologist, which Sandra and I think is a perfect career choice for someone who has already survived an eruption. She called me last week to tell me about a rock she found near the schoolyard. A piece of granite with a vein of pink feldspar through it. She described it for 6 minutes in precise detail. I sat on my porch in Sudbury and listened to every word. When she was done, she said, "Papa, do you think it's valuable?" "I think it might be the most valuable rock in Canada," I said. She considered this. "You're exaggerating." "Probably," I said, "but I'm also right." She laughed. That real laugh, the loud one, the one that was always supposed to be in her. I keep the Easter image in my head sometimes, not the bad part, just her small hands wrapped around mine at that table. Trusting me before she'd even decided to trust me. Children know, somehow, who will look. I don't know how they know, but they know. I'm glad she knew. I still think about the moment at that Easter table when Hazel's small hands wrapped around mine and wouldn't let go. She didn't say anything dramatic. She didn't scream or point or explain. She just held on and she watched that garage door, and something in her knew, before she could fully put it into words, that I might be the one who would actually look. I wasn't looking hard enough before that day. That's the part I have to sit with. The signs were there for months, the quiet that settled over her, the nightmares Kathleen had explained away, the new padlock Derek had put on the garage door last autumn. I saw those things, and I told myself reasonable stories about all of them. That's what we do when the unreasonable truth is too large to hold. We shrink it into something we can carry without disrupting everything around us. What I've come to understand, slowly, the way you understand things that cost you something, is that decency isn't passive. I used to think being a good man meant not doing harm, not lying, not cheating, not hurting anyone. But sitting across from Hazel at that dinner table, I realized that decency is also a verb. It requires you to act on what you know, even when acting will cost you your daughter's trust, your son's opinion, your own comfortable idea of what your family is. Derek had constructed a life that looked, from the outside, like a normal suburban family in Barrie. The padlock, the controlled access, the carefully maintained service. Predators rely on the fact that most people will choose the comfortable story over the cold one. I almost did. What stopped me wasn't courage in any heroic sense. It was just that I paid attention. 31 years of firefighting teaches you to read a scene quickly, to notice the detail that doesn't fit, to trust the thing in your gut that says something is wrong before your brain has assembled the full picture. When Hazel said, "The garage makes me bad," I didn't dismiss it because I didn't understand it. I stopped, and I stayed with it, and I let myself understand what she was actually telling me. That's the other thing I keep coming back to. Knowledge, without the willingness to act on it, is just a kind of cowardice with better self-justification. I could have gone home from that Easter dinner, told myself I wasn't certain, told myself I needed more evidence, told myself it wasn't my place, parents' rights, family privacy, not wanting to be wrong. All of those thoughts crossed my mind that night. Sandra cut through every single one of them with 7 words. Hazel doesn't get a later. Hazel is 9 now. She wants to be a volcanologist. She lectures me about granite. She plays ringette and eats too much pizza and laughs the way she was always supposed to laugh. None of that was guaranteed. All of it depended on one Sunday evening on a porch in April, and a 7-year-old who trusted me enough to try, and a grandfather who was paying attention. I don't think of myself as someone who saved her. I think of myself as someone who finally did what I should have been doing all along, listening carefully, thinking clearly, and refusing to look away when looking away would have been so much easier. That's all it takes, and it's everything.